Over the coming months, a series of experts and historians will debate issues surrounding the First World War. These will aim to engage students in some of the more crucial topics, uncovering and discussing new opinions about the Great War. These range from female emancipation to the Middle East to the Catholic and Protestant movements in Northern Ireland. But to begin the series of podcasts, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig was scrutinised. His actions have provoked heated debate ever since the First World War. In this opening debate, students had the opportunity to engage with revisionist historians who believe the general's been underestimated, as well as those who don't. The debate focused especially on his record during the key Battle of the Somme, the centenary of which on July the 1st fell just days after the debate took place at Manchester Cathedral. The cathedral was chosen as the host venue as it houses many books of remembrance and regimental colours. It's also linked to the Duke of Lancaster Regiment. Participating in the first debate, chaired by Professor Kate Williams, were Professor Gary Sheffield, Professor Robin Pryor, Dr. Elizabeth Greenhalgh and Professor Stephen Badsey.
So our first question on Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig is, can a man who presided over the Somme ever be considered a success? So quite a lot to talk about in 10 minutes, but we're going to do it because we're just fabulous historians. So we're going to start with Gary.
Could it be considered a success? Well, the first thing I would say is that you need to contextualise the Somme. It's a dreadful, absolutely destructive event, but it's only one event in a long and very bloody war. I wouldn't go too far towards defending Haig's conduct of the Somme, not least because I think this is actually the point at which he steps up to command at a level for which he and his army and their staffs are inexperienced. But if you take the war as a whole, I think that Haig can be, in fact I think he must be, considered a success.
It's hard to say that a man who presides over an army that is the most effective weapon on the Western Front in 1918 is not a success, yet I don't think Haig was a success. He presides over the Somme, which is a disaster from start to finish. 432,000 casualties for an advance of about 10 miles. In 1918, the war is won by a series of technicians. They're the people who run the artillery batteries. They're small group commanders. The war is almost won in spite of Haig. The war is won at a point where Haig, as commander of the British forces, becomes almost irrelevant.
So on our final question, we're going to do this at the speed of light because we're going to do this incredibly quickly. But is Haig's changing reputation over time a reflection of how the war, views of the war have changed in recent years? So we're going to go very fast with this one so we can have some time to talk afterwards. Robin, what do you think?
I'm not sure that Haig's reputation has changed in any kind of straight line from the late 20s to now. Late 20s when the first few books came out, one by Liddell Hart, Reputations, 10 years after. Haig's reputation has gone up and down. Now, when his diaries were first published in a much inferior edition to the one Gary's edited in 1952, this was said to be the longest suicide note ever written by Haig. We've had a rehabilitation of Haig by John Terrain, which Wilson and myself have tried to move the thing in the opposite direction. Gary and Stephen, to some extent, have moved it back. I'm not sure that there's any kind of straight line with his reputation either going up or going down. I think it's rather a bumpy a road that Haig's reputation has ridden since the First World War, and I expect that bumpiness to continue. Mm-hmm. I can't see a consensus ever emerging on Haig. No. And in a way I hope it doesn't, because we would then be North Korea. Yes. And no one would buy our books.
Oh well, we would all buy our books. That's very interesting, fascinating stuff. Stephen, your thoughts on reputation?
Robin actually wrote in a review, it feels like 20 years ago, we need no more books on Douglas Haig.
Yes, I probably did.
Yeah, I think there have been at least 8 since then.
Yes, so much for the power of historians.
Yeah, there's something about Haig which causes people not just to engage intellectually, but to lose their tempers with a man who died all those decades ago. I like to believe it's not so much that views are changing, but that we're learning more and getting better at understanding history. But perhaps I'm being optimistic.
We are learning more, but I think the whole point about the fascination of history and the First World War is that we're now asking different questions. As you grow up, you will ask different questions of the First World War. And unless you do start asking different questions, we're not going to get much further forward. So evidence is important. Evidence changes things, but it's also new generations of historians coming forward who will ask different questions of this war and find different answers.
Wonderful, thank you. And Gary, final word from you on this question about reputation.
Okay, well I started by saying I thought Haig wasn't as important as everybody thinks he is, and I still stick to that. One of the reasons I said that is because there are so many more interesting things to be discussing about the First World War than one individual commander who had less agency than people think. And the debate is frankly rather stale, and I think it's time we move on. I mean, to be honest, if you want to make up your mind about Haig, read my book, read Robin's book, make your mind up. Or you might agree with me or with Robin or with neither of us, or it might be somewhere between them.
Do the other two of us get a look in here?
Okay. Robin's book, Elizabeth's... No, but we have directly addressed Haig. The First World War centenary, I think, has been really important for the amount of new scholarship coming out on all sorts of fields, which has certainly changed my views about all sorts of things about the First World War. Not much of it actually has been about the Western Front, because actually, not to say that we've come to an end with that. Sorry, this is the British Expeditionary Force on the Western Front. But it's sort of running out of steam until we get someone come with a completely new revelation or a completely new theory. We need to go on beyond that. The final thing I'll say is, talk about Haig's changing reputation. It has changed in scholarly terms. So, I mean, Robin quite rightly said, John Terraine, 50-odd years ago, rehabilitated Haig. It's gone all over the place. I think that Terraine went too far in his rehabilitation of Haig, so I've tried to drag it back a bit, but it's different from Robin. But actually, I don't think Haig's reputation in the popular sphere has changed at all. Not since his death, because when he died in 1928, he was quite genuinely a national hero. But since his reputation collapsed in the mid-1930s, not least thanks to Basil Liddell Hart and to David Lloyd George, Haig's reputation hasn't changed very much at all. Look at the caricature of him in Oh, What a Lovely War. Look at the caricature of him in Blackadder. Look at the popular books being churned out by people who really don't count as historians at all, but nonetheless get the wretched things published. It's actually going on to, it's just simply continuing, now I think, a very, very stale theme. So has Haig's reputation changed in scholarly terms? Absolutely it has, and there's some nuance. Has it changed in popular terms? It hasn't, and I doubt if it ever will.
We caught up with the speakers and some of the students and teachers in attendance to hear their thoughts on the topic and the event.
I think it's very important that tonight happened. What I've found when I've done debates like this before is that people's viewpoints don't always change immediately. They go home, they think about it, they reconsider, they do some research of their own, and then they change. So actually that's what's really meaningful, that people are starting to think and they're starting to give it consideration. And I really think what's so exciting about this evening was seeing all these young historians, many of them wanting to go on to do history at university, many of them actually going on wanting to do a job a bit like mine, being a professional historian, a public historian. And that's what's really wonderful about, for me, is seeing the next generation so inspiring, full of so many ideas, full of so many opinions, so grown up really, considering how young they are. And I think in particular the First World War, something that's had so much coverage over the past few years, really shows us how there are new opinions and how the young are so involved in this, so involved in history. For them, history is absolutely alive.
I take part in debates like this precisely so people can challenge my ideas, particularly young people. You always learn from the people you try to teach.
I thought it was pretty interesting. Like, they had a good knowledge and everything as well, which I thought was pretty good. Gary Sheffield as well is a pretty big guy, like on the whole debate thing. it was a really good debate, and I'm really interested in studying history now. Most people won't be interested in history until like they come to events like this and like engage in it properly.
Personally, I think it's really good and really interesting for them to see that history is not just about facts, it's more about historical interpretation and debate within. That's something that we find really difficult to get across to them in school, so for them to actually see a conflict of opinion in action for us, especially as the A-level students, it means a lot because then they get to see historiography in action. And also it raises awareness and encourages them to hopefully study. It's not just about making notes or engaging in what we do within the classroom, but they get to come out, they get to see the artefacts, they get to see the interpretation.
I think I was very unbiased on it because I don't really take great interest in World War I, which is probably not the best thing to say. That was at the start, but when you go into something like that and you have these 4 opinions of 4 great historians, I think it opened your eyes to it more, and I think coming out of it much more interested with my own opinion on it as well, feel much more educated on it.
I think that tonight's been really fascinating, and it's been really interesting for our students because they don't often get the opportunity to take part in such a historical debate, and to give our students that unique experience that they wouldn't necessarily get access to in any other forum. So it's been really wonderful to come and hear university professors speak to them.
We hope you found this debate interesting and helpful to your studies. Further debates will take place in Manchester, London, Leicester, Scarborough, Brighton, Bangor, Barry, Newcastle, Edinburgh, Exeter, Cambridge and Birmingham between September 2016 and March 2017. As we mentioned earlier, other key issues to be addressed across the series include female emancipation in the Middle East and Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland.